Dark clouds loomed low on the horizon as I arrived at the outskirts of the forgotten settlement. A tumble of rotting wooden shacks and leaning structures perched in the restless shadows of the mountains. The sun had dipped behind the jagged peaks hours earlier, and though it was only late afternoon, dusk had come early to this forsaken place. A swirl of dust rose around my boots with every step. The wind whipped by, whistling mournfully through broken windows like a sorrowful choir. I pulled my coat closer around me, as if the garment alone might shield me from the haunted hush of this abandoned town. The only road leading here was little more than a broken trail, rumored to devour visitors just as the doomed settlers had been consumed many years ago. I'd come in search of something intangible, an echo of history, a swirl of intrigue. Decades ago, they had called it the most promising boomtown of the West, a place where fortune favored the bold, but rumor said that greed eventually hollowed it out. The miners had struck a rich vein of ore beneath the rocky hills, and the promise of gold and silver drew adventurers into the clutches of avarice. According to legend, just when they thought the wealth would flow endlessly, a single night of chaos changed everything. The ground quaked, the mine collapsed, and the town's population vanished in a wave of terror. Some said it was a plague, others a malevolent curse awakened by desecrating the earth. Whatever the explanation, the townsfolk disappeared, and the place had become infamous for the moaning wind that carried their restless spirits. Now, as I ventured down the bleak main street, I sensed something more than just the stale hush of an abandoned community. The buildings seemed to lean in, forming a corridor of ancient wood that sighed under the force of the wind. Peering through a warped window, I caught the fleeting reflection of my own face, pale and unsure. Something in the dimness behind me seemed to shift, but when I turned, the street lay empty. Each building I passed whispered of half-remembered nights, of dancing and lavish spending when the gold drew strangers from afar. In the ephemeral light, a chipped sign swayed in the breeze, the painted letters nearly illegible. All I could make out was the faint image of a pickaxe crossing a miner's shovel. The skeletal remains of the saloon rose to my right, a forlorn monument to laughter and drowned sorrows. The sign overhead, half dangling from a single chain, bore the name The Prospector's Refuge. Its porch boards were brittle, the steps caked in dust. I climbed them cautiously, mindful that the planks might give way under my weight, and my boots made dull echoes in the silent gloom. As I pushed open the door, a long-forgotten murmur filled my ears, like the lively hum of voices that once gathered here. The large room lay mostly in darkness, with only a faint slice of light piercing through the ragged remains of a tattered curtain. I shivered despite myself. It felt as though the saloon were a realm apart from the dusty street, cocooned in an inescapable hush, broken only by my breath. I blinked, letting my eyes adjust. With each slow step across the warped floorboards, particles of dust swirled and danced in the feeble light. In places, the wood had buckled and fractured, revealing the dirt beneath. A peanut shell, disintegrating with age, lay next to a bar stool that stood precariously, upright but listing. I imagined the sounds of clinking glasses and raucous laughter echoing, less than a breath away, in this strange pocket of lingering regret. Passing the bar, I noticed shelves that once showcased bottles of bourbon and whiskey, their glass surfaces long shattered and their contents evaporated. My gaze lingered on a single bottle, left upright, cork askew and label unreadable. A scuttling noise in a back corner startled me. As my heart hammered in my chest, I glanced quickly in that direction, half expecting to see a rat. Instead, I glimpsed a flicker of movement, something pale and not quite solid that vanished the instant I tried to focus. A chill seeped into my bones, and I recognized the presence of something unsettled, some lost remainder of this place's human inhabitants. Outside, the wind howled again, a plaintive chord that pierced every edge of the town. From where I stood, I could see through a broken window directly to a narrow alley. Briefly, I caught sight of a figure crossing from one leaning building to another. Dressed in old-fashioned miner's garb, It moved hunched, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. In the back of my mind, I recalled the legend, the phantom miners, cursed to forever guard the fruits of their greed. A group of them, stoic and silent, wandered these streets after dark, compelled to defend the hidden riches that had once lured them to their doom. Curiosity spurred me onward. While I felt a growing unease, I also found myself drawn deeper. Slipping out of the saloon, I followed the alleyway where I'd seen the phantom shape. The wind died down for the moment, leaving the utter hush even more unnerving. The alley was squeezed between walls that threatened to converge and swallow me whole. My breath, shallow and tight in my chest, grew visible like wisps of ghostly vapor. Then, I saw it again, a shape crossing the far end of the alley, draped in the ragged attire of a miner, head bowed in a slow shuffle. I thought to call out, but something in my throat closed up, as though voicing even a single syllable would break some dreadful, delicate balance. Instead, I followed quietly, using the shadows as cover. The figure led me past broken-down carts and makeshift scaffolding, eventually merging with the open street. The air tasted metallic, reminiscent of iron or blood. A battered sign to the side mentioned the entrance to a mine, a cautionary note in weather-worn paint reading, "Keep out, unsafe." The phantom disappeared around a rocky outcropping. I hesitated, checking the map I'd hastily sketched from local hearsay. It indicated that the main mine shaft lay not far from here. Steeling myself, I ventured forward, drawn by a combination of dread and unshakable desire to discover the truth. Perhaps I hoped to confirm the existence of spectral miners once and for all, or maybe I merely couldn't resist the call of what they guarded, the rumored lost treasure that had never been recovered. Sure enough, I soon arrived at a chasm in the stone, framed by timbers blackened with age. The wind, which had been quiet, returned with renewed vigor, shrieking in this funnel of rock. I stifled the urge to shout, just to hear a human voice in the howling emptiness. With trembling steps, I entered the mine. Darkness pressed in immediately, and the walls felt constricting. I turned on my flashlight, which illuminated the jagged path ahead. The corridor sloped gently downward, and droplets of moisture clung to the slick rock. Roots dangled from the ceiling, reminiscent of withered fingers. My footsteps echoed ominously, as though the earth itself groaned at my intrusion. Minutes, maybe hours, seemed to stretch as I ventured deeper. Wooden beams that once supported the pathway had rotted to precarious stumps, and I ducked beneath a fallen beam. The place exuded an oppressive presence, an almost physical weight of sorrow and longing. I passed rusted tools abandoned long ago. A pickaxe leaning against a crumbling support, a broken lantern lying in a puddle, a forgotten cart with a single rusted wheel. The memory of the miners lingered in the stagnant air, a silent testament to their hopes and their tragic end. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a wide cavern. My flashlight revealed the collapsed remains of what looked like a storage or gathering area. Scraps of clothing and debris floated in murky puddles. This must have been where the miners brought their richest finds, sorting the ore that would later be shipped out to feed the town's hunger for wealth. Searching the walls, I spotted hammered spikes and hooks, but they held no sacks of gold or silver. The rumored hidden cache was nowhere to be seen. The notion of turning back flitted across my mind, but I pressed forward, driven by the memory of the phantom figure who had traveled here. If the curse of the haunted fortune was as real as whispered tales said, perhaps that fortune yet remained, hidden behind some collapsed passage. The walls trembled, as if in resentment of my prying. At the far end of the cavern, a narrow gap led into another shaft. I squeezed through, inhaling the musty air, ignoring the chill that prickled the back of my neck. The way forward felt unnervingly like a slow descent into the land of the dead. Ahead, a faint glow flickered along the rock, as though someone held a lantern just out of sight. My heart quickened. Could it be another living soul? Or had I stumbled upon the phantom miners themselves, gathered around their precious secret? The flicker grew brighter, and I hastened my step. The stale air thickened, and I realized something was off. The glow gave no warmth, and it cast odd, shifting shadows on the walls, shapes that pulsed and writhed like tortured spirits. Finally, I entered what must have been the main vein of the old mine, a grand chamber with pillars of jagged stone, partially carved smooth by picks. Tattered ropes hung from iron spikes in the ceiling. Stunted minecarts lay half buried in the rubble. And there, in the center, stood a group of figures dressed in shredded work clothes, their flesh pale and translucent, their eyes vacant hollows reflecting the faint, ghastly glow. They were miners, locked in a perpetual vigil around a mound of stones that looked suspiciously like it might contain gold or silver ore. Thick veins of bright metal threaded through the broken rock, glinting in the unnatural light. My approach must have disturbed them, for several turned in unison, their empty gazes fixing upon me. Fear hammered in my chest, anchoring me to the spot. Their faces were twisted masks of exhaustion and despair, tinted by the faint luminescence. One of them, a tall man with the remains of a tattered bandana around his neck, took a step forward. Though no words passed his lips, I sensed the command, the warning, the demand that I leave at once. Yet I didn't flee. The presence of the cursed wealth, so close at hand, held me in a terrible thrall. I felt the darkness of greed stirring in my own soul, a link to the same lust for riches that had once claimed these men's lives. Without thinking, I raised my flashlight to better see the gleaming metal. It was so close, a narrow seam threading through the rock, enough to make one wealthy beyond imagination. But as my flashlight beam grazed the spectral miners, their visages contorted in pain, or perhaps fury. They reached out with skeletal hands that seemed to flicker between corporeal and ethereal. I stumbled backwards, wrenching my gaze from the gold. A sudden quake rattled the cavern. Chunks of rock tumbled from the ceiling, smashing against the rubble below. The spectral miners staggered, reeling as the shaft buckled and groaned. With trembling limbs, I tried to keep my balance. A chunk of beam crashed down, almost pinning me, and I narrowly dodged it. Fear overcame me. Had I triggered the same cataclysm that doomed the town? I caught sight of a tunnel to my left, a possible path of escape. Desperate, I raced towards it. The miners gave chase, their pallid forms gliding over the unsteady ground, the shriek of their silent rage echoing through my mind, even if it produced no tangible sound. Down into the labyrinthine corridors I fled, occasionally glancing back. Their ghostly forms flickered in and out of view as the trembling earth unsettled the darkness. The air filled with dust, and it choked my throat. Time lost all meaning in that subterranean nightmare. At times I had the impression that the walls were alive, shifting to entomb me deeper in the mine. My flashlight flickered, its battery threatening to fail. Just when I thought I felt the stale hint of a breeze, maybe a way out, I came upon a steep ledge. Below it, the mine shaft dropped into a black abyss. My flashlight revealed nothing but empty air. Behind me, the flickering glow of the phantom miners advanced. My heart pounded. If I stayed, I would be at their mercy. If I jumped, the darkness might swallow me forever. The rumbling of rock overhead suggested there wasn't time to weigh my options. Something in the gloom seemed to whisper. I recalled the rumors of hidden passages leading out. Passages that laborers had constructed in haste for ventilation or Trojan escape. Summoning all my resolve, I rounded an outcropping in hopes of spotting a stable path. The ledge curved away, and I followed it carefully, feeling each step to avoid tumbling into the chasm. Ghostly light flickered on the walls behind me, casting my shadow in monstrous proportion. My lungs burned and my throat dried with fear. Then I saw it. Another opening, partially collapsed, where rubble parted just enough for a body to squeeze through. Heart racing, I lunged for it, forcing my shoulder against broken timbers and stone. As I wriggled through, an avalanche of debris collapsed behind me. The spectral glow vanished, blocked by the fall of rubble. Darkness swallowed me completely, and my flashlight died with a final blink. I sank to my knees, panting, tears prickling as relief warred with dread. I couldn't see what lay ahead, but at least the miners' pursuit had been severed. The silence in that moment felt suffocating. Layers of soil pressed in from all sides, and it seemed as if I were trapped in the grave. I crawled forward in the blackness, relying on touch. The tunnel was narrow, but there was a faint draft that gave me some measure of hope. Moving inches at a time, I groped for handholds and found the soggy remains of a wooden ladder. Exerting every ounce of will, I climbed what felt like an endless incline. The air grew marginally fresher with each rung. My arms screamed, and my mind fluttered in a swirl of exhaustion and panic, but I kept climbing, spurred on by the desperate need to escape. Finally, my head collided with a trapdoor of rotted wood. I pushed hard, the hinges groaned, and the trapdoor gave way, revealing a swirl of dusty twilight. I scrambled out into a shack that had partially collapsed. Broken walls let in enough dull light for me to see. I sank into what might have been a corner, letting my eyes adjust. The remnants of heavy mining equipment loomed like dead trees, half buried in the rubble. My clothes were torn, caked in grime, and my throat felt raw, but I was alive and, seemingly, on the surface. When I stepped outside, the wind tore at me, keening through the ghost town's dead streets. Darkness had set in fully, draping the ghostly structures in an otherworldly shroud. A sliver of moon cast feeble luminescence. Warily, I walked down the deserted thoroughfare, half expecting to see the spectral miners manifested in every corner. Though I heard no footsteps but my own, I felt them watching from behind shattered windows, from alley mouths swallowed by night. At length, I spotted the outlines of a small chapel near the far edge of town, a structure I had overlooked earlier. Its steeple was crooked, the cross at the top missing an arm. Seeking sanctuary, or at least a moment's respite, I pushed open the door. The interior was gloom incarnate, pews cast in deep shadow, the altar a faint shape. My footsteps echoed. The hush here was different, almost reverent, as if the hallowed ground resisted the corruption that had devoured the rest of the town. For a moment, I found comfort. Yet even in this place, a tang of dread clung. Approaching the front, I made out an open book lying on the altar. By the moonlight, through a broken stained-glass window, I could see it was a journal. The scrawled handwriting told a partial story of the day when the mine collapsed, the desperate pleas of a preacher who tried to warn the townspeople that their greed had awakened something malevolent beneath the earth. He wrote of ominous omens, a blood moon, a surge of inexplicable quakes. In his final entry, dated the day the town fell silent, he described hearing an unholy wail from the mine, as if the tortured spirit of the earth itself was crying out in rage. He warned that those who prized riches above life would find themselves forever bound to them. I closed the journal, unsettling dust motes that glimmered in moonlight. My chest tightened with the weight of that long-departed voice. Everything became clear. The phantom miners were the manifestation of greed's curse, doomed to stand guard over gold they could never spend, forever tethered to the place of their demise, and anyone who tried to claim that gold would share their fate. A shiver rippled through me. Was I safe so long as I never attempted to unearth the treasure? Or had I already sealed my fate just by witnessing it? My spine prickled, and I spun around. Outside the chapel's broken window, I noticed a flickering glow moving through the street. A cluster of those drifting spirits made their way in a solemn procession toward the chapel. They seemed oblivious to me, or maybe they were drawn to the place of final confession. I couldn't imagine them crossing the threshold of holy ground, but I took no chances. Slipping to the rear door, I left quietly. The open sky met me, starless and foreboding. Time was meaningless in this eternal twilight. I could hardly recall when I had last seen the sun. The wind still whistled between the vacant buildings, but it now sounded more urgent. I hurried down the main street in search of the trail I'd arrived on. My heart pounded, each step filled with the sensation that the earth might crumble underfoot, plunging me back into the blackness of the mines. Far down the street, in the corner of my vision, I spotted other ghostly shapes lurking. They glowed softly in the darkness, drifting between the skeletal remains of houses. At last, I caught the outline of the old wooden sign that marked the entry into town. It was swaying back and forth in the gale, the lettering too faded to read, just a warning from an older era. Beyond it lay the broken trail that had led me here. Relief threatened to collapse me, but I forced my legs onward. Despite the hunger in my belly and the ache in my bones, I pushed forward, wanting only to escape the cursed realm of silent sorrow. As I left behind that final building, something in the gloom shifted. I looked over my shoulder. In the distance, a lone figure stood at the edge of town. Glowing with that same eerie luminescence, it lifted an arm, as if beckoning me to return. Whether it was an invitation or a threat, I will never know. An overwhelming sadness struck me then, a sense that these spirits were trapped in endless misery, not from pure malevolence, but from the cruelty of an unbreakable bond to their avarice. I harbored an urge to turn back, to do something for them, yet self-preservation won out. I clenched my jaw and trudged forward into the night. For hours, I negotiated the rocky path as it snaked away from the hollowed town. The biting wind followed me, trailing at my heels like a malignant rumor. My mind was a knot of fear and regret. I had come foolishly, enticed by tales of treasure and curiosity. I'd witnessed proof of something beyond mortal comprehension. The phantom miners, the cursed fortune, the quake that threatened to obliterate everything. It all boiled down to a lesson, etched by tragedy. Eventually the path descended into a steep valley, and I caught sight of the faint lights of civilization far off. Even from this distance, those lights felt like a blessing. My legs shook from exhaustion. Dirt caked my face. But I pressed on until, near dawn, I reached a small outpost with a dimly lit porch. A tired old man came out at my pounding. Concern lined his face as he asked me what had befallen me. I could not form the words to tell the entire story. All I could manage was to stammer something about a ghost town and a cursed mine. He must have known the place. He shook his head slowly. "Best leave it in peace," he said. "Many have tried to chase its legend. None found anything they cared to keep." He led me inside, poured me a cup of coffee, and let me warm myself by a small fire. Words came to me in a rush then, but I kept most of what I had seen to myself. Some truths were too dark to share. The old man listened gravely, occasionally nodding, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Finally he said, "The dead don't forgive trespassers." I nodded, gazing into the jumping flames, the steam from my cup drifting up like cigarette smoke. My limbs still trembled. Despite my terror, I felt a pang of sympathy for the souls trapped back in that windswept ruin, men robbed of rest, cursed to wander for eternity, clinging to the wealth that had promised so much and delivered only infinite torment. The hours passed, and soon the morning sun rose, painting the ridges with gold unlike the cursed glitter I had seen in that dark shaft. I was safe, for the moment. Yet a lingering impression of that haunted place lodged in my chest, an ache that felt like remorse. I realized with a jolt that the dust of that town had embedded itself in my very clothing, in the cracks of my boots. Would it be enough to carry the curse with me? Or would those watchers remain behind, bound to the place? An unsettling thought, one that kept me awake for many nights thereafter. In time, I left that corner of the world behind, returning to the routines of daily life. But I never truly escaped the haunting memory. When the wind howled at midnight, I would wake in a sweat, imagining the spectral figures drifting between leaning buildings in a perpetual search for redemption. Even in the bustle of civilization, I felt the quiet hush of that forsaken place clutching at my mind. It whispered that true riches do not lie in the ground or in the shimmer of gold, but in the freedom to walk away, unshackled by greed. Some nights, I swear I can hear the echo of a pick striking stone far in the distance. An illusion, no doubt, or the recollection of a feverish nightmare. Yet the image abides, a host of gaunt, pale miners turning their hollow eyes toward an intruder. The currency of their longing is heavier than any gold can match. If fate ever draws me back to that forlorn ghost town, I will do more than simply run away. Perhaps I'll try to lay their spirits to rest, if such a deed is even possible. Until then, I cling to the solace of daylight, knowing that, in the darkest shadows, the phantom miners remain, eternally guarding the cursed remains of that greed-blighted era. And the wind, haunting and restless, carries their lament across the barren land.